Welcome to a Global Risk Community Chat. Today our guest is Stefan Schork. I'm very happy to have you here today, Stefan. Welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Yes, likewise. We are very happy to have you. Before we get into the topic, can you briefly introduce yourself?
Absolutely. My name is Stephen Schork. I am the editor and the principal of the Schork Group. Our primary goal is to provide research, analytics, and trading and hedging recommendations and analysis for the global energy community. We've been in business now for the past 18 years.
Oh, that's a really long time. Super nice. And well, let's then get into the topic. What would you like to share with us today?
I think the news on everyone's agenda is what is happening in the global commodity markets and specifically energy. What we've seen over the past 6 months, both in Europe especially, but here also in the United States, in North America, has been a significant rise in the price of energy, not just for crude oil, but we're talking natural gas, especially when that comes to Europe, and rising power prices. And what this means for economic growth and the outlook for the new year.
Well, stage is yours. Then let's start perhaps with some key things about this topic. And yeah,
absolutely. As one of my favorite economists quipped, the first lesson of economics is scarcity. You'll never be able to produce everything that everybody wants. And therefore, you need a mechanism to balance that, to balance scarcity. And that, of course, is price. Now, unfortunately, the first lesson of the government is to ignore the first lesson of economics. And here we have the situation. Now, the bellwether here is what we've seen in Europe this past summer and going into this winter with the natural gas market. Let's backtrack now. About January of 2020, the EU was not comfortable with the way carbon permits were traded. Carbon permits for for European industrials and end users of fossil fuels are a requirement that allows you to emit a certain amount of CO2 into the atmosphere. Now, with the way these carbon permits were trading, the market was depressed. Therefore, the price of carbon was low, not encouraging end users to move into more desirable renewables. So what the EU decided to do in January of last year was to reduce the amount of permits in the market. So simple economics, when you cut back the supply of an asset, the price of that asset is going to rise. So by the end of last year, we saw a 140% rise in the price of carbon. Therefore, end users in Europe burning coal, it was no more economical because the price of carbon priced you out of the market. Okay, so the EU accomplished half of their goal. They pushed end users out of coal, but where did the end users go? They did not go into solar. They did not go into wind. They went into natural gas. This was a problem because natural gas prices supplies at the end of last winter were already low and prices were already rising. So you had a significant amount of demand move into the European natural gas market to the point where by the end of last year, natural gas prices in the primary benchmark for European gas prices, the Dutch TTF contract, title transfer, was trading at the equivalent of $300 barrel oil equivalent. So yes, we accomplished half. The government, not understanding economics, they did not get the desired result. And now Europeans and now everyone across the globe are paying higher costs going into and through this winter. So as we look ahead now, the situation now interjects with what is can never be avoided. And that, of course, is geopolitics. We see what is going on today with Russia, the Ukraine, NATO, so forth. We've already had Russia, Putin, threatening to use the gas weapon. Europe is completely reliant on their winter fuel needs from Russia. So you have the geopolitical situation, what's going on in Ukraine. You have the geopolitical situation, what's going on to the Nord Stream pipeline, which is supposed to move Russian gas directly into Germany. Now, there are all sorts of uncertainty of what this means in going forward with regard to supply security. So Europe is in a very precarious situation because their supply is right now extremely insecure, certainly through this winter and going into the foreseeable future. Of course, now this is having a knock on to other effects because these are all dominoes. So Europe began with trying to artificially control demand for coal, and they succeeded, but they pushed that demand from coal into natural gas. Then in natural gas, that move pushed natural gas prices to the equivalent of $300 oil equivalent. So what happens? You push that demand from gas into the oil markets to sate your needs. So we've just had this continuation of knocking down, and first it was coal, then it was gas, now it's oil prices. So, and then our end product, what we consume, heat to heat our homes, lights, electricity to power our homes, are all rising at extraordinary levels, creating a significant downturn or drain on economic growth, both in Europe and the United States. The United States is a little bit further behind Europe, but we're certainly moving on that way, because even though we are sitting on a massive supply of coal, of natural gas, of crude oil in the United States, the politics suggests that we don't want to access these fossil fuels anymore. And therefore, we are violating the second law of economics, and that is capital goes where it is welcomed, stays where it is well treated. So it is clear in the current political environment in the United States that capital investment in the fossil fuel industry is not welcomed. So this can only have one effect 1, 2, 3 years down the road. When you're not investing in infrastructure, when you're not investing in the ability to get BTUs out of the ground, you are going to retard supply. Demand's only going to increase for these fossil fuels. So there's only one way from now into the foreseeable future for oil prices, natural gas prices, commodity prices to go, and that is higher, whether we're talking Europe, whether we're talking the United States, and of course, where the big demand drivers are today, whether we're talking about in Asia.
Yeah. I'm hearing a lot of actual big impact, potentially big impacts on that energy sector in general in all fields now, upcoming years like 2022, 23, 24, and hearing this increase in gasoline, crude oil, everything. So on that end, what maybe like we can do or the industry can do as a takeaway point to, prevent an increase or stabilize it? Perhaps some takeaway on that end.
Yeah, the big takeaway here is that we are doing everything we can to propel energy prices higher. As Winston Churchill, I believe, quoted the United States, here in the United States, we always make the correct decision after we've exhausted all of the wrong decisions. And right now, we are in the process of exploring all of the wrong decisions. So we all want a greener earth, but bear in mind, fossil fuels are a part of the future. It is not a zero-sum game. And with the way the politics are being played both in Europe and here in the United States, it is a zero-sum game. We cannot consume any gas. We cannot consume any oil. We must consume wind. We must consume solar. That's the wrong way to go about it. Yes, we must consume solar. We must consume wind or other renewables, hydroelectric, in market areas where those technologies work. Solar in Southern California, in the Southwest United States, works great. Wind in Texas, most of the time, works great. Hydroelectric in the Pacific Northwest United States works great until it doesn't work. So when we do not get rain, and the Pacific Northwest has been in a drought, we cut back on hydroelectric. So even though the demand's there, we don't have the water to run those turbines. We had the same situation in the UK in the fall, where all of that wind power was completely shut down for a considerable amount of time because the wind, for some reason, stopped blowing. So when that happens, you need to have a dispatchable BTU, gas, oil, so forth, that you can always flip onto. But that's not the game that we're playing right now. We want to eliminate all this fossil fuel, and therefore we are eliminating security. So what we can do instead is to work with the industry, to support the industry, and to encourage the industry. Back in November here in the United States, the administration made the preposterous decision to release 50 million barrels of crude oil from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. This was crazy because the Strategic Petroleum Reserve was never designed to manipulate energy prices. The only reason why we have here in the United States in petroleum reserve is because we learned our lesson from the 1975 oil embargo from OPEC. So the supply or the reserve is only there to meet short-term unexpected disruptions to the flow of crude oil. It is not meant to manipulate prices. Therefore, the move to put all this oil, even though the administration wants to talk about how green they were willing and are dumping an extra 50 million barrels of oil that, quite frankly, is not needed on the market. So it is sending an absolutely confused message to the industry that you are now discouraging investment, because if I'm a producer, why am I taking that risk to invest in infrastructure 2, 3, 4 years down the road to get more supply to the market, where I'm going to sit there and I'm going to be lambasted by the government because I'm a fossil fuel producer. Oh, but by the way, when fossil fuel prices for consumers, i.e. voters, gets too expensive, I'm going to dump extra oil onto the market. So it's an absolute backwards market. And the bottom line, the third and most important lesson of economics is high prices are the best cure for high prices. If you drive prices high enough, the industry, if you allow it, will respond and get supply to the market. And that's exactly what happened 20 years ago. In the early 2000s, when oil rallied to $150 a barrel, all of a sudden you saw a tremendous amount of investment into the industry that got a lot of supply in North America to the market, and which was the primary driver of pulling oil prices from 150 barrels down to $40 a barrel. We're now in the reverse situation where we're discouraging this investment, even though demand is growing. And so right now, with the way the government is moving, they are the primary driver of higher energy prices in the years ahead.
Yeah. Well, all I can say is I hope, of course, everything will get more balanced, more, like sustainable on all ends, essentially. Of course, on the green energy part of things too, but also in this sense of crude oil or fossil fuel and everything too, just some sustainability I hope can be achieved.
It should be. The markets have a great way of reconciling the choices of myriad individuals. Right now, we're reconciling those choices by higher prices. But there is a place for renewables, but there is also a place for fossil fuels, primarily natural gas. And we never even talked about nuclear, but that is your most environmentally friendly renewable energy going into the future.
How it is for you to be part of, or like comments on being part of the community?
Being a participant in the risk community?
Yes.
It's fantastic. It's you're really adding something for the benefit of both the economy and believe it or not, the environment. When we started publishing our research note back in 2004, it was a much different environment. We've had about maybe 4 or 5 changeovers in the industry, where right now we're actually having to talk about outlawing fossil fuels. So from a risk standpoint, it creates a tremendous challenge for both end user and producer to keep a market that's in balance. So working on both sides, the clients of the Schork Report, we have the biggest producers of fossil fuels and renewables in the world. And we also have the largest end users, in helping to balance those decisions, rightfully so, in hedging and locking in creates that scenario for greater risk management and then greater decisions, which ultimately benefit all of us in the long run.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing that opinion as well. That kind of concludes our time for today. So I once again thank you so much for joining us today, sharing your expertise and also your insights and what future holds.
I appreciate the opportunity, and happy 2022 to everyone.
Happy 2022 to you as well. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
You too. Cheers.